Welcome to Flying Flavor. This is episode 44, and I'm your host, Stephanie Pichet. And I was going to say I'm alone this week. If you listened to last week's episode and the week before, you'll notice that I've been kind of doing some taping and editing on my own, mostly because I'm in travel zone. So the cool thing is while you're listening to me now, I'm actually in Spain. How cool is that? So make sure, hopefully you're following along on Facebook and Instagram for those updates, not on the Flying for Flavor page. I kind of leave that to my co-host to sort of help me out with that one. And as much as I wish I could take them with me in my suitcase, I can't take everybody, unfortunately. But hopefully I'll get some more live videos and other photos and stuff to share with you then. So today we're talking motorcycles. Now, the reasons I wanted to do this is because, of course, my husband is a big motorcycle enthusiast. And as much as I see the bike parked in our garage, it's kind of like too much information to much as I see the bike parked in our garage, and then I know about little trips that he's done here and there, and he takes it to work back and forth, and he goes out with his friends here and there. I do know over the last few years he's spent more time planning out actual weekend jaunts or overnight things or even week-long riding adventures with a friend of his. And I figured that he must not be the only one. And I think one of the ideas about travel is to sort of experience things in a new way. And I think that even he's noticed that going in a car, going in a plane to some place to go and take a look around, you may see things completely differently when you actually are sitting on a motorcycle for it. I am going to be completely candid, and I own a jacket and I own a helmet, and they're both very cute and I'm very proud of them, but I think I've worn them twice. It was one of those things that when he got his last new bike, the plan is that I was occasionally going to go riding with him here and there, but for me I always feel like I'm in the way, and that's just me, but I do know that there's a lot of people who travel as couples and as singles and as groups, and everything from a Harley to a sports bike. There's all different models, and there's pretty much something for everyone. And I think that having this conversation about what kind of opportunities are out there, I thought would be a great thing. So no, I'm not alone. I brought my friend Jordan Nixie in today just because she's my tourism girl, and I don't like to kind of wing it on subjects like these. So I thought, who better to bring in the expert? So she is the digital marketing coordinator with Northeastern Ontario Tourism here in their Sudbury office. And she's got, if you could see the photos that she has here, we have the entire spread out of all the different things about motorcycle tourism here in Northeastern Ontario. And I wanted to kind of give an introduction to sort of whet your whistle or pique your interest on using your own backyard if you're here in Northeastern Ontario to start planning out weekend getaways or other adventures, because you really don't have to go too far because everything's here. So welcome, Jordan.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. Actually, I'm looking over all this stuff here and getting more comfortable by the second.
Maybe it'll encourage you to get a bike. No?
Well,
maybe?
It's funny that you say that. So the first thing I will say is that, yes, I work in tourism, but I don't ride myself. But one thing that we do a lot is work consumer shows and trade shows. So this will be my second circuit, and coming up this winter would be my third circuit working some of these shows. So I've worked them in Toronto and also in Quebec and Montreal. And one thing that you do find a lot is when you talk to people who ride, you learn a lot. You learn about the types of questions they're asking, what they're interested in, and what they want to do. So a lot of my knowledge of the product that we offer and the touring routes and what people are looking for comes from talking to riders one-on-one at the shows, whether they're part of riding clubs maybe, or maybe they're looking to get into riding, or they're exploring it for the first time. You talk to these people, and one thing that I have realized, and I've actually started to consider riding myself a little bit more. I always found it a little intimidating before, but now that I've met a lot of these people, there's a really strong sense of community.
There is.
That everyone has, and there's a lot of passion if you do this sport, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I always used to amaze myself. Even before Norm used to go and do the long haul trips, he said there's this it's almost like everyone in the area and this particular town, they all go for breakfast at this place. And then on Saturday mornings, everyone's here. And they can pull up into just about any Tim Hortons. And if there's another bike, you can easily strike up a conversation with another owner. And then they're talking about different models and different adjustments that they got in their bike recently. And great for sharing advice back and forth. They have like little hand signals and waves to each other on the road.
Absolutely.
Which is, it's fascinating about how it's a pretty tight-knit group even among strangers.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I found most encouraging meeting people, you see all different sorts of riders. You see the all-male clubs that come through. You see the Christian riding clubs that come through as well. But
I didn't even know there was one.
There are, and they actually have a special designation on their jacket. One thing I got a crash course in when I went to the International Motorcycle Super Show in Toronto. So it's the beginning of January, and we'll be there actually with a booth. I got a crash course. One of my neighbors had a dealership, and he was there promoting one of their motorcycle rallies, Bike Fest. And I knew he had the knowledge in the background, so I said his name was Crazy with a K. And I said, "Hey, Crazy, what do all these jackets mean? I know you know, so like they're all saying something with their jackets and their badges and their patches." So that was really interesting to kind of get that background. But one thing I found really interesting is that there are all female riders clubs. They'll have names. One that comes to mind is the Wind Sisters. And it's just about inclusivity and a sense of community and empowerment for different people. And they welcome completely novice riders to people who've been doing it forever.
They do.
And they plan trips together. And that's really cool. It's something that these people look forward to every weekend. They'll plan, trips to different lodges, resorts, destinations, and they do these things as part of the same community, and I think that's really cool.
Well, actually, that's a good little segue into it. So we're talking about destinations. So within Northeastern Ontario tourism, these touring things are basically what you guys do is you manage to package together or give suggestions to people who are coming into the area or who live here and want to explore a little bit more about, okay, what are some of the hot spots that people who own a motorcycle now, if they want to do, let's just try a weekend, let's do a day trip. So what would we consider distance-wise for a day trip? And then what kind of destinations do people kind of tend to go towards?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it depends, I think, on where you're starting from. Mm-hmm. So for Northeastern Ontario, our region starts in the southern borders around the French River area. We take in Lake Nipissing, North Bay, all the way down to Mattawa, and then we run up the border with Quebec. So, if you're coming up from Toronto for a day trip, that might be a kind of a there and back. If you're really okay with doing long kilometers on your bike in a day, you might look at doing something like the Ride Around Lake Nipissing tour. Takes in communities like Sturgeon Falls, North Bay, Powassan, Port Loring, these kind of areas. And that loop, and I believe it'll be in the show notes, is about 300 kilometers round trip. So
that's nothing.
So for a day trip, and depending on the type of riding and how many kilometers you might put on in a day, that might be really accessible. And then, of course, if you're starting, somewhere in Sudbury, that's a great day trip. Weekend trips as well, loops like that one are really popular. If you have a 3-day weekend, maybe you might consider doing a trip to Manitoulin Island and back. It's a great excursion. There's a ferry crossing. You go up to a really popular area, nice beaches, great roads. So those are kind of more accessible weekend trips. Now, if you were going from Ottawa, perhaps you might consider coming up 17 and doing something like the Lake Temiskaming Loop Tour. It takes you around Lake Temiskaming, up through the communities of North Bay, Temagami. You can kind of pick your way through little towns like Latchford, Larder Lake, Coleman, Cobalt, kind of little towns that, you might just drive through them, but there's a lot of local history and interesting spots and things that might make you want to stop and get off the bike and spend a little bit of time, talk to the locals. And then it takes you across the border into Quebec as well as you come back down. So that's another great weekend ride that you could do as well.
Okay, so those short haul ones, those are great for people who may not have a full week off here and there, and they just want to take a weekend or an overnight thing. They can kind of plan around that. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about specific destinations or attractions, what is there certain categories of attractions that kind of draw people, like so if they're looking for a destination, or are you finding that it's kind of like the journey, they like the little stops, or do they like this one destination, we're going to go here and then kind of make our way back?
I can only speak from my own experience and thinking about all the different people I've spoken with, but one of the questions I do get on a regular basis is like, okay, that's great, it's this many kilometers, but what is there to do there? And so my counter question to that is, well, what kind of rider are you? What do you like to do? Some people are out there to ride. They, you know, to use a cliche, they want to feel the wind in their hair and kind of have that experience. But some people like to stop a lot along the way. They might be looking for, you know, scenic lookouts, a great place to have a lunch, maybe looking for a great chip stand. Great restaurants. Those are really important, right? People are eating a minimum of 3 times a day, so they want to know where are good places to eat, to stop, look for those sorts of amenities. Scenic lookouts, but also, you know, hiking trails come to mind if you might want to stop and stretch your legs a little bit. If you're only looking to put a couple 100 kilometers on the bike for the day, it might be for you about the actual journey as opposed to the destination, and you kind of alluded to that in your intro as well. So a lot of these routes depend on the type of rider that you are, but restaurants definitely come to mind as popular, like really important. What are the food stops? What are the must-dos? And I'm that type of person myself. I love doing road trips and travel. I will decide to go to a city based on a culinary experience that you can have and then plan the whole trip around that. And I don't think that's unfamiliar to yourself either.
We are called flying for flavor after all.
Exactly. So a lot of it comes down to that sort of style. Some people that I talk to, and I would say this is a much more niche market compared to the bulk of people, but some people are looking for those off-road experiences. They're looking for gravel roads. They're looking for secondary roads, and people are really interested in Northern Ontario and Northeastern Ontario because we do have so many logging roads. They have these opportunities to kind of get off the beaten path a little bit more. And I think that's
Razz
really
around a
attractive.
bit, as my mother would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of those kinds of considerations, but if you're sticking on a lot of these main routes that we have that we promote in our motorcycle touring maps, we promote them because we know that there's motorcycle friendly accommodations, there's restaurants, there's gas stations, there's repair shops if you should need that sort of service, but there's also attractions. One of the larger loops that comes to mind, we call it the Great Legends Tour, and we call it that because it takes you through all of the major communities, points of interest, or a lot of the ones, I shouldn't say all, major communities and points of interest. And that's things like you can go to Cochrane and they have a phenomenal polar bear habitat facility.
I know, I've always wanted to go see the polar bears. I still haven't done it yet, though.
It's amazing. It's worth the trip. And then when you're in Cochrane, you know, you stop for a meal, you tour around, you explore a little bit of this area that maybe you wouldn't have, like you maybe wouldn't be driving through that anyways. So it makes it a bit of a destination to get up and do those sorts of things. But what I like about the Great Legends Tour is that actually there's all sorts of big things that you can see. There's a big bison on the route. You can go see Chimo the polar bear in Cochrane. You can see the McIntyre head frame in Timmins. And it's kind of like a list. You can go around.
There's a big game list in Africa, so now we have a big legends list, right? Northeastern
Exactly. And so it provides you something to kind of move you through those tours and gives you points of interest while just enjoying the ride and enjoying the scenery and enjoying that big wide open space that Northern Ontario is really well known for.
Yeah, I think that there's my first, of course, business ideas came pop into mind. So because you're going to have links to these and where to provide people with particular route suggestions, my thought is if you happen to be a hospitality business owner on any of these routes, you should be actually checking to see and providing these, you said, motorcycle friendly accommodations, motorcycle friendly establishments. So an area where bikes can park safely, you can keep an eye on it. Having those kind of things where, you know, they may need, like, you know, I'm thinking of truck stops, right? Mm-hmm. Truck stops came into fashion or of a necessity for truck drivers. Not only wanted a meal, but some of them wanted a shower. Mm-hmm. Right? So there's things along the route. So I think it's one of those things that if you happen to own one of these kind of businesses, and especially if you're seasonal, you should be taking a look at the different routes and these packages and ideas that are out there, and then kind of maybe tailoring some of the services or products that you're providing to these motorcycle riders who are actually passing through. They may plan their trip around stopping to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do know that there are quite a lot of businesses along these routes that are doing that. When we put these routes together, there was a lot of communication with the business listings that you'll find on these loops, just to make sure that they are exactly that, equipped to handle this specific type of tourism and to not only handle them, but to welcome them in. It is a very seasonal activity, of course, and people start planning their trips. And, you know, I think people who ride on a consistent basis, like from the very first day that they put their bike away in the garage, they're already wistfully thinking about next season and where they're going to go and when they can get out, right? And I mean,
I have been tripping on bike magazines and things over the last couple of months.
Yes, and I think that's why the trade shows are so popular, is because it's the dead of winter. And of course, we live in Canada, so it can be long and cold and dark. And the trade shows give people something to look forward to. They can be around like-minded individuals. They can look at shiny bikes. They can plan their trips. And it's that thing that they use to hold themselves over until they can take their bike out of storage again and hit the road for that first ride.
So you said there's that one big trade show. Is that open to the public? That anyone can go?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is it every January, you said?
There's a couple. So we've attended one in the past. So January, it's generally the first weekend after the new year. So there's that one. There's another one in Toronto in February that I can't think of the name of it right now. There's also a series that run in Quebec. So I know that I've attended the one in Montreal before, and it's called Salon de la Moto. They run them in Montreal and Quebec City and all across the country. Basically, a lot of these shows travel. So we'll attend them as a destination marketing organization. I'm promoting the touring loops, talking to people. We bring these maps here that are in the show notes, and those are always a really hot ticket item as well. And a lot of these people are map collectors. You'll see them kind of, they have their bag and they're like, great, you have a map? Perfect, I'll take two. So they're collecting maps, they're looking for trip inspiration, and a paper map is still a really popular commodity.
It is.
You can't write on your phone screen. This doesn't go out of style. There's something really nice. Some of them are, using waterproof paper, so they can be friendly to bikers.
Oh, that's cool.
And that sort of thing. So there's definitely a whole market that's catering to these people specifically.
So we were talking about these shows. So most of them would probably be at the beginning of the year. Is that the calendar year? Or would there be anything coming up maybe fall, end of the season?
I think this is just my assumption, but a lot of trade shows that I have attended or have seen generally fall in a January to April period, because it's the off season or the shoulder season.
Yeah.
So they know that people are at home thinking longingly of summer days when people can get out and actually do things. So it's a great time to plan and to talk to people and help them kind of narrow down their choices and figure out where they want to go. Mm-hmm. Now, there is a power sports show that I know of that takes place in Toronto in October, but that targets more snowmobilers. Okay. Is my understanding. So they're generally a little bit ahead of when the actual season would be. And this is also because it's low time for tourism, right? The operators are not necessarily open. Some people are 4 seasons, but not everyone is. So it's a good time because they're not doing peak business either, the way Correct. They would be in the summer.
Makes sense. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is that, as opposed to us trying to promote this now, is I thought it'd be really fun, is that once we have the dates for early 2019, I thought maybe I could, I might send Norm on a little shopping expedition. He will hate doing that, I'm sure. I'm rolling my eyes. But maybe him and one of his friends, they can go to either the Montreal one that you were talking about, because he does go to Quebec quite often, but at least to go to one of the shows as someone who does ride and see if they can come up with plans. And he probably doesn't even know these shows exist, which is kind of cool.
It's really neat because you meet so many people from all over the world, really. I mean, they're targeting that particular city, but the vendors and the operators and the tour promoters, they're coming from all over the world. and they're promoting regions, they're promoting bikes, they're promoting products that you would use while on your bike. There's all sorts of variants of the people you might meet there. So it's pretty cool.
Okay, so then the last thing is, if someone wants to go and plan one of these things, because they're not doing such long distances, depending which area that they're planning to tackle here and for how long they're planning to stay, do you have a suggestion of like how quickly they need to plan? I'm thinking about things like accommodations if they're staying overnight with some of these routes. Do you have an idea of how quickly things kind of fill up, or has anyone ever said anything?
I really think it depends on where you want to go and when you want to go. So in Ontario, of course, and in most parts of North America, winter is a real thing. So, you know...
It's like an understatement.
Yeah. Right? So summer is peak season. July and August are always going to be your busiest times. September long weekend, the Labor Day weekend is going to be a busy time as well. So if you're booking around a long weekend, book further in advance. If you're booking in really popular locations, I'll just use Manitoulin Island as an example. It's a very popular destination for camping, for outdoors tourism. People love to go there. And if you know that about a destination where you're going, book further ahead just to avoid disappointment. That being said, it's always good to book ahead and call around. The further ahead that you know your dates, just book it. That way you won't be disappointed if something doesn't come through.
And I also think that, I mean, even when I'm planning things, I can book my accommodations. Where I need to sleep is probably my priority.
Yeah.
And then aside from that,
Yeah.
the meals, the route, the timing, those kind of things can sort of flex around a little bit. So I think it's a matter of prioritizing what needs to get booked first, right?
And I think, too, one thing for motorcycle tourists that's important as well is weather considerations. You don't want to go out riding when it's raining. So it's kind of this fine balance of booking too far ahead and not knowing what the weather is going to do, but then also wanting to be able to book kind of last minute because you want the weather to be good and to make sure. So I think a lot of it depends on your flexibility. Do I have to go this week? Is this my only week of holidays for the year? Maybe that's a consideration. Or, you know, is this just a weekend trip that we could do on any weekend? And if you're more flexible, I think you have more options, and that's the case in booking any sort of travel.
And I think that if you're booking something that's a little bit more concrete and you don't have that flexibility to be able to change dates, I like the idea of that there's suggested attractions or things to do that, yes, if you do encounter inclement weather for whatever reason, that, you know, you're usually trying to ride when it's clear and kind of taking a break here and there. But if you have a whole game plan or plan Bs ready to go, the things that don't matter if you're on the road or not, that you can kind of work around so that, if you happen to get a rainy day, then today's the day we're going to go see this, and then we'll continue riding in the morning. So I think it's going to be a matter of being flexible, which is very hard for me.
I understand.
I'm trying. I'm going to be doing the 2 weeks in Spain, aside from my accommodations. I didn't plan anything else where I usually have meals planned. And
see, and that's like, for me, it's the accommodation. As long as I know that there's a place to stay. Even when I went to Southeast Asia, we won the whole trip except for the first 2 days. I knew when I got off that airplane in Hanoi that I had a hotel room to go to. It was like 12:30 at night, the middle of the nighttime. Like, you want to know that you have that place to put your head at the end of the day. For me personally, it puts me at ease. If I don't have that lined up, I can't relax. So that's just me personally. Not everyone is like that, of course. But it's a consideration to make when you're planning travel. Like, what type of traveler are you? You fly by the seat of your pants, that's okay. But if that puts you at ease, then the more prep you can give yourself ahead of time, I think the more of a positive experience you'll have all around.
I think so. Now that we've kind of piqued everyone's interest for the Northeastern Ontario destinations, because that's kind of our home stomping grounds, there are other destinations, as you mentioned, from the international shows and everything else, that people are always looking for those bigger adventures. Maybe it's the once a year type thing that instead of sounds awful. Instead of going to Disneyland this year, you decide that you're going to go, you and your friends, or maybe just as couples or whatever, going to take off and go and do a long distance one. So I had a chance to sit down with my husband and just talk about motorcycle tours. mostly because as much as he's been doing them for the last few years, I know when he goes, I know who he's going with, and I know the general area where he is, but I know nothing about what's actually involved in this planning process or just to be candid, his lack of planning. I wasn't going to actually invite my husband to be part of my podcast right off the very start, but since we were talking about travel stuff, and since you just came back from your last motorcycle trip with your friend, I was sort of surprised to hear little things about how you managed to store some of your luggage and all these other things. And I thought, if I'm asking these questions and I'm not a motorcycle enthusiast, I'm assuming there's other people out there who are motorcycle enthusiasts who may have those questions and more. So I thought we could kind of put together a package because people may not realize that you can do this. So I wrote down a few questions. So you can be patient with me. We kind of do this as we need to. First of all, can anybody rent a bike?
As long as you have a motorcycle license. So you do have to have your M class on your driver's license. So yeah, they won't let you obviously rent it if you're not licensed to ride it.
I'm asking silly questions because I don't know any of this. But does it work for any province though?
I've only done out east and out west, so a few provinces in the middle of the country I'm not aware of, but I think it's going to be the same for Canada.
So as long as you have an M-Class license in whatever province you're at, you're most likely going to be able to rent a motorcycle in other provinces.
That is my understanding.
Okay, so far basically you've hit, you rented the first one in Nova Scotia?
New Brunswick.
It was in New Brunswick the last time, and this time it was in BC.
Correct.
So we know of 2 provinces that allow Ontario M-Class licenses, so keep that in mind. Okay, so how did you, this first time when you had this idea, how did you find about where to rent the motorcycles?
Simply looking online. My understanding was I thought it was only Harley Davidson's dealerships that would rent, but this recent one in Vancouver, I was quite pleased that I rented a BMW. So they had all kinds of makes and models, which was quite unique.
So it's a bike dealership, so they sell bikes, but they're actually renting some as well, or you're renting out the ones that they also sell? Like, I'm confused about that when you say a dealership.
Well, for an example, Harley Davidson's, yes, so they actually sell bikes, but they also have a few set aside that they actually use for renting on a regular basis.
And this is commonplace just about everywhere, or most dealerships do this? I know you rented bikes once. We were in Aruba?
Yeah, it was the same thing. It was a Harley Davidson dealership. They had a few bikes that you can rent, so we rented for the day, and it was quite awesome.
Yes, I know. You talked about it for like 6 months after. Okay, so now you found the bikes. So you mentioned Harleys, because of course you know that I'm not very up on all my motorcycle lingo. So you can get sports models, cruisers, or I don't know the names of all the different styles. But basically all styles of bikes you can rent, or is it just more one kind than the other?
Depending on the dealership. So the recent one in Vancouver, they literally had all makes and models, sport touring, cruisers. I don't know that I've seen sport itself as far as also referred to as a crotch rocket.
Woo, hashtag that.
They had quite a selection. Even had scooters for those who wanted it.
Okay, well, I'm just not jumping to scooters. Okay, so this is going to be, I know you don't like divulging this information to your wife, let alone on TV. So how much does it cost to rent a bike?
It's generally around $150, $125 to $150 per day.
Oh, that's not bad. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like renting a car, I guess. Is it like unlimited kilometers? Basically, it's the same idea as renting a car.
Usually in the past it was always unlimited. This time it was 300 kilometers per day.
Okay.
And then 20 cents per kilometer over and above. But right at the beginning we've negotiated that down to 15 cents as opposed to 20 cents. And I think we even did go over a little, but it didn't charge us.
Oh, well, that was very nice of them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do you plan out the trip? Like, are there preset sort of routes that you can be going? Do the dealership or something give you some suggestions? Do you kind of make up your own map of where you're going? Because you kind of need to space things out for okay, where am I going to stay? Where am I going to eat? How long are we going to ride today? What's the weather like? I'm just kind of curious to know how you kind of organize the time.
The main planning is actually renting the bikes. So making sure that you're actually reserving, because we were lucky in Vancouver to get the ones we wanted. When we brought it back, the gentleman said, I'm really glad that you had a great week and that we can actually rent you this bike, because right now we're actually booked for the entire season and we're booking into next year.
Wow.
So it was a new bike, and it was actually not part of the inventory. That's why I got a chance to get it. There's only a few thousand kilometers on it. But renting the bike is the biggest thing. Every time I've done it, I've had to put a deposit to make sure that I was serious about renting. Secondly, booking flights to get there. And that's pretty much the planning that we've done. So we didn't book any hotels ahead of time, even when we went out east.
Okay, I can make a laugh. You're not going to do that again, aren't you? Because,
for sure.
I mean, during the summer, to not book hotels ahead of time is a bit... You have much better, maybe it's a guy thing, you're much better at kind of flying by the seat of your pants. I would actually like be hyperventilating, not having a plan of where we're going, what we're doing. Maybe it's just because I haven't allowed myself that kind of a vacation in a while, but...
Yeah, no, I generally wouldn't worry about it. The first year we actually brought tree tents. So like hammocks that would actually hang between two trees, and so it didn't matter. We didn't have to plan. We can ride as many kilometers as we wanted. When it was getting a bit dark, we'd decide, okay, is there any national parks around or whatever? So we planned a little bit of that. But essentially, we wake up, we look at the weather, and then we just get on the bikes and go. We stop for gas when we need to. We stop for food when we're getting hungry, and that's pretty much the extent of the planning.
Okay, so how far ahead? I'm just thinking like time frame wise. Like, I mean, you already had a plan of which week you were booking off to go and do this. How much time in advance do people need to plan this out, like to renting the bikes? Like if you would say, okay, well, if you're planning to go away at a certain time, is it a seasonal thing where you need to book like the season before?
I mean, this was our third year, and so over the winter months, we would actually decide where we're going to go. Previous two times was the eastern part of Canada. This time we decided we're going to go the western part. So pretty much booking your holidays, and so we made sure that our holidays matched. From there, we actually, I think it was actually even May that we actually reserved the bikes.
Wow. Okay, so you only need a few months' notice, essentially. And is there a lot of different dealerships you're finding? I guess the bigger centers will have more of them and more bikes available, and so it depends on where you're going, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay.
And once again, the most efficient way is simply Googling motorcycle rentals in Canada or wherever you're going to go.
Is there any other kind of, just because I'm always kind of leery about that, is it always best to go towards a dealership that's recognized, or is there some guy on a side road someplace renting bikes? You haven't seen any of that? People have to worry about that kind of thing, or?
No, definitely not. And I don't know that anyone would.
Okay.
Because essentially you can take off with the bike and just never come back. So, I mean, so with the dealership, I mean, they're taking your driver's license. You do have insurance. They do take a deposit on your credit card. In this case, they actually took $2,500 per bike.
Okay.
Ahead of time, so they protect themselves accordingly.
Okay. Now that's like the cool thing was having to do with packing. So depending on what kind of bike you rent, I'm assuming they have the option for add-ons, right? You said that you're the saddlebag things and all those pictures that you showed me. I'll include pictures on the show notes too. I'll grab some of them off his phone. But the just for storage to take things with you, especially if you're going for a week. Can you keep adding on things as you need to? Like, how does that work with the packing?
Well, the way I personally did it, I mean, I brought my helmet, but they have helmets to rent as well, because in the past I would rent them. So this time I chose to bring my helmet, but essentially a suitcase, put things somewhat in smaller bags so it was easier to transfer from the suitcase into the bikes.
Like those little packing squares kind of things?
Exactly.
Okay.
So had the big suitcase, just got there, transferred literally the contents from inside the suitcase into the saddlebags. And then from there you just leave the suitcase behind, and then you pick it up at the end of the week. So that's what I did. So what my friend did, he went a lot lighter than I did. He literally had his backpack in his jacket. So he actually wore or had his jacket with him, had his backpack and his helmet attached to the backpack, and pretty much that's all he had for the entire week.
And you, on the other hand, bring a suitcase. For those of you who know Norm, that's not a shock. So, but you said they had storage lockers or something there for you?
No, you just it's like a garage, and so they just kind of put it.
They just tuck it around the corner.
Exactly, in a closet or something.
In other words, to take your valuables with you. Don't kind of leave them in a.
Of course.
Gotcha. Okay, and then I guess the last question. So, if there's any links, maybe with some recommended things or maps, or if there's anything that you can share, can I grab some links from you of how you kind of plan this out, or the dealership you went to in New Brunswick and maybe the one in BC, just for people who are planning to go to those areas? I thought maybe I could include them in the show notes to save people some Googling time.
For sure, and just a quick note on that. So out east, when we rented it, they didn't help us with where we're going. I mean, we're going to the Cabot Trail, and that was a phenomenal ride. But in Vancouver, on their website, they actually have sample routes, because I think people come in from other countries as well. Mm-hmm. So there's sample routes. You can look at all of that. So they were a lot more organized, I'll say. But we didn't quite need that ourselves, but that was the case.
You're rock stars. Okay, so yeah, so we'll include some of the links in the show notes if anyone wants to take a look at them. Okay, and then as well as I'll give some links myself just for suggestions for things like packing cubes and stuff that might be helpful with your packing needs. And then just to close it out, I guess because I don't ride motorcycles, I need sort of describe it about, you find this is your third time doing it. And so just sort of give me an overall description of why you plan this as part of your ongoing thing every year, and what you like, your favorite thing that you like most about it.
It's a dream come true. I mean, I was able to do it with a childhood friend, and when we were growing up, and even before, I'll say the teeny bobbers, but the young teenage years, envisioning one day that we would have our own bikes. Every time we heard a bike, we'd kind of be looking at it, where the sound came from, things like that. But literally, it's a dream come true to be able to now, as adults, go out and spend some time together and just kind of ride, and really the sense of freedom when you're just really on the road, and you're the closest thing to flying, if you will, because you're not encased in metal. You have the wind. Yes, you have your helmet. You can keep the visor open, all of those things, but it's really a sense of freedom of swaying on the roads. And if the roads happen to be a bit windier than others, then that's even better.
All right, windy roads it is. Okay, thanks, honey.
You're welcome.
I love listening to my husband talk about the feeling of freedom that he gets on the bike. He enjoys it so much, and it tickles me to listen to him every single time. But it's one of those things that I'm still the girl that's happy to sit on the porch with a glass of wine and wave to him. Well, goodbye, and
bye,
say
honey.
Bye, honey. Have fun. Drive safe. That's just, everyone has their own thrill of certain things, right? And said that people who do ride motorcycles have a huge passion for it. So Jordan's going to have some stuff on the show notes to sort of help you planning your next little getaway or day trip or whatever. Basically, you just need bike and then fill in the blanks, right? So what are you going to include in our show notes for us?
So in the show notes for everyone, you'll find digital copies of our big adventure tourism guides, your accommodations, restaurants, where to find that information, as well as our motorcycle touring map. I'll also include a link if you want hard copies to those. So we'll mail them out to you and get them right into your post box.
Oh, for those who like the paper things.
Exactly, which a lot of people do. And then for anyone who's in that niche where they're looking for back roads and off touring stuff, secondary roads, we'll include a link to a resource for that. And then also any trade show dates that we're aware of that would be relevant.
So if you want to go and just have an entire all-encompassing...
Nerd out with bikers. this is the place to do it.
I was gonna say I go to wine shows and nerd out, so I can completely understand the level of excitement. Anyways, thank you very much for joining me today, Jordan. So I wouldn't be sitting here talking about motorcycles by myself. I really appreciate your knowledge and resource, because otherwise this would have been a very one-sided show. That's for damn sure.
Thank you for having me.
So next week we are kind of staying on the travel theme, and I had a chance to sit down with Stacy. I actually cornered her at one point, our in-house travel agent. I wanted to have a discussion with her about, because of all the flight delays, and we've already had an episode on flight delays, there's a lot of times, sometimes people are waiting in airports. There's always weather things that are happening. Of course, later this year, they're already talking about there's going to be more hurricanes, more weather patterns that we have to prepare for and plan around. So there's going to be more time that you're going to be waiting for these things. So what do you do at an airport when your flight's delayed for another 5 hours? You're in a strange city or town, and you're trying to figure out what to do and how to kill time. So I have a bunch of suggestions besides just hanging out at a bar. So if you're interested in that one, make sure that you check us out next Saturday for the Airport Hangout edition. And in the meantime, if you haven't had taken the time to subscribe and rate us on any of the podcast platforms, now's the time to do so. That gives us a chance to figure out who's listening and where you're listening from, and this way we can kind of plan out future episodes, what topics are actually resonating with you more, what areas people are listening from, and it also helps us plan out any road shows or other events that we're going to be having going forward. So we're pretty much on every platform now. If you know of a podcast platform that we're not on for whatever reason, you can always reach us at flavor@stephaniepichet.ca. And of course, this is episode 44, so all our show notes connections are going to be at stephaniepichet.ca/flavor44. And as always, you can always find us on the built-in player right on the flyingforflavor.ca website. And in the meantime, what do you say when you close a motorcycle show? Right on.
Right on, right on, right on.
That's perfect.